Welcome everyone to the Mind of Christ here on YouTube. My name is Justin Amos and I am so excited for today because we are in studio with the world famous Mama Mystery podcast host, Kelly Evans. Kelly, thank you so much for letting us crash your studio and hang out for a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Absolutely. Well, Kelly, for anyone watching that might not be maybe familiar with Mama Mystery, can you tell our viewers a little bit about what your podcast is about, why you started it, and maybe a little bit about some of the recent success that you've had?
Yeah, so we started Mama Mystery, a true crime podcast, back in 2020 during COVID. So I was originally a hairstylist, but COVID put us all out of work. And so I was at home, I was bored, and I'm self-aware enough to know that boredom usually doesn't equal something good for me. So I needed something to keep me busy. I've always been interested in true crime. I watched, these true crime shows growing up, probably at too young of an age, but I was very interested in people's stories and especially just the human condition, what makes people do the things that they do, but also learning about victims and just kind of trying to discover what their life was like and what they've gone through. I think adversity is something that's really important. And obviously, true crime, there's a lot of adversity and sometimes it equates to something horrible, but I think it's really important to tell people's stories. I've always been interested in writing. And so when COVID hit and I was out of work, I really wanted to merge these passions that I had for true crime, honoring victims, writing, telling these stories. And so it started out actually on YouTube. I made a few videos, some true crime videos on YouTube, but as you know, YouTube is a huge undertaking. It's a lot of work. And so to make it a little easier on myself, I just started doing podcasting, just audio. It was a little easier for me to do that. So yeah, we grew over about 18 months to about 1 million downloads, which is really hard to hit when you're a podcaster. And then after that 18 months, we got the next million in about 6 months. And then now we're reaching about 3 million downloads overall. So
that's amazing. Wow. I'll be sure to drop all of Mama Mystery's social media links below in the description, so definitely check out what Kelly and her husband Austin are up to on their show. So, well, Kelly, the Mind of Christ YouTube channel is all about mental health, and so I'd love to hear any connections that you found between mental health and the cases that you've examined. So are there any maybe patterns or just observations that you found in the cases that you've done podcasts about and just the impact that mental health has had on some of those cases?
Yeah, absolutely. So we just did our 156th episode. So I have covered a lot of stories and I've found a lot of common themes. And one of the things that we often talk about is this concept of nature versus nurture. Like how many of these cases are born from a rough childhood? Some of these people who commit crimes, did they come from a rough upbringing? Did they sustain their own trauma and it caused them to act out in the way that they did? Or was this something that was just born in them, this innate evilness? And so, honestly, there's not really one common theme is what I've found. So with some of the serial killers that we've talked about, they come from good families. They're not coming from broken homes. And there's just something within them that snapped. And then you have some where they sustained their own childhood traumas, whether it was, abuse by their parents or, unfortunately, there's a lot of kids who have undergone or went through sexual abuse and it manifested in the way that they acted as adults. So yeah, there's kind of a theme and then there's kind of not. So it's hard to determine exactly what makes somebody do the things that they do. I think that's where the biggest interest in true crime, the fascination that you see with true crime, why people are so interested in it, it's because people want to figure out why people do the things that they do and they want to understand it better. But it's such a tricky thing because there's not always an answer. Sometimes mental health is involved and sometimes it's not, and people have just snapped.
Yeah, it certainly seems like there's not one thing that can be pinpointed to the common cause that leads to all of these tragedies, and so it just kind of lines up with everybody's story is unique and different, and what might trigger someone to go down a trail of destruction might not even impact someone else, and so everyone's story is just so unique.
Yeah, and everybody's coping skills are different. You've got people like J.C. Lee Dugard, who was kidnapped and held captive for I think 11 years. She was forced to have children with her abuser, and she had to give birth in the backyard of this home. And she has really, she survived, but she also thrived after this horrible thing that happened. After she was released and reunited with her family, she's now raising her girls. She's written a book on her struggles and what she went through, and she's using her story to help advocate for other victims. And so you have some people who are victims who use their story to help others, and then you have some victims who unfortunately end up taking their own life because they don't know how to cope, or they're just so traumatized by what they went through. But there's not really any common theme as to what makes somebody cope better than another. It's just everyone copes differently and struggles on their own.
Let's take a minute and talk about the victims and the impact that these tragedies have on their life. Obviously, there aren't even words that can describe just the unimaginable heartache that they've been through, losing a loved one. What are some things that you would share with our audience that these families need that have been the victims of such horrific tragedies? How could people that live near or have access to someone who has been a victim of such tragedy, like how could we love and serve those people well? Are there any insights that you might, kind of give into that?
One common theme that I have found is that a lot of families want the victim or their family member who sustained a tragedy or who have gone through tragedy themselves, they want it to be acknowledged. And I don't think that they want you to act like their story isn't there or that what happened didn't happen, And so I have some families who want to talk about their stories because if they've lost a loved one, they don't want that person to be forgotten and they don't want their loss to be for nothing. So there are some families who do want to talk about it and it helps them cope. Then you have some others who are more vocal about how they don't want to be used in stories. And so, for example, Jeffrey Dahmer, he was a serial killer, and he has had multiple docuseries made on his crimes, his life and crimes. There was recently a Netflix docuseries or like a scripted series about his life. A lot of the victims' families were really upset by this because they felt like their victims were being used for entertainment purposes and they weren't really being honored. Their stories weren't being honored. And so there are some stories that I won't cover. For example, I won't cover Jeffrey Dahmer because I know that it upsets the victims' families. And so I guess you just kind of have to, toe that line kind of carefully. But for the most part, though, families who have lost somebody to something horrible or tragic, they want their stories told. They want justice for their family. And yeah, that's really what I've learned. For the stories where I've actually interviewed family members, they really want to talk about it. They want to get the truth out there. Honestly, too, media and news media, a lot of the corporate type of media channels sometimes skew the story for a more dramatic effect, and then the details that the families want out there don't get told. And so I think it's really important for people like me or other podcasters or YouTubers who tell these stories to really honor what the families and the victims' families want told. So just respecting, it all just comes down to respect at the end of the day.
Absolutely. It kind of makes me think, if you are friends with someone who has suffered or live in a community with someone that has that tragedy and you're not sure how to respond, would you say it would be appropriate, to ask them?
Yeah.
How can I best love you and care for your family during this horrible time?
Absolutely. Yeah. And just asking how they're doing, if they want to talk about it, letting them know that you're here to talk about it. I mean, I obviously tell these stories to the masses, but if you are just a friend who, has a friend who has been through something horrible, the best thing you can do is acknowledge them and validate them so that they don't feel like they're alone or that they're ostracized because something horrible has happened.
So it sounds like if you have a relationship with someone or live in a community with someone or a family that's suffered, one of the best things you can do is just ask them, hey, how can I help you? What do you need? Is this something you want to talk about, or would you like your space and privacy right now?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, good. Well, Kelly, I remember when I first approached you about this interview and told you about my channel and my emphasis on mental health, and I was curious about mental health and some of the cases you've studied. You brought up and just kind of initiated yourself some of your own mental health struggles and how it's been a pretty serious issue at various times in your life. So I think it would be super beneficial and helpful for our audience if you would be vulnerable enough to share a little bit about some of your own mental health struggles and maybe some things or some people who have been impactful for you in your own journey in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. I am very open about the struggles that I've faced because I think that it's important to talk about the things that you've gone through if you're comfortable enough to do it, because it makes people feel less alone. And as I've talked about my own struggles, I've been amazed at how many people have come out of the woodworks to share similar stories. So growing up, I grew up in an affluent area and I had a very comfortable upbringing as far as the support I had financially. But what people didn't realize is that behind the scenes, I was in a home with someone who struggled very much with addiction. And it was a I don't want to say violent, but it was just a very rocky situation. My mom really struggled with addiction to various things, and it manifested in really horrible ways for my family. And so I struggled with that a lot growing up, and especially when you're a daughter and it's your mother. I developed a lot of trust issues towards women because I felt like I couldn't even trust my own mom. So how am I supposed to trust any kind of like girlfriends and mothers-in-law or like any other kind of female relationship? And so going through high school and college, I struggled a lot with my friendships and my relationships. I was trying to fill this void with other relationships that maybe weren't as good for me. And then I did get married at kind of a young age, and I felt like I was kind of just going along the assembly line and doing what I thought I was supposed to be doing, but not really thinking about my future and how this was going to impact my future. In 2014, my mom passed away from her addiction, and it was kind of unexpected. At the same time, my dad was going through some serious health issues that I thought might take him from us. And then in that same year, I also went through a divorce. And so 2014, 2015, that was a really, really hard year for me. I also gave birth to my second child. And I remember sitting in the exam room when I was pregnant with her. So what I didn't mention is that my mom actually died when I was 9 months pregnant with my own daughter, my first daughter. And so I remember sitting in the exam room just really struggling emotionally and telling my doctor, I think I need help because I am really struggling and there's so many things going on. I just need something to help me get through this storm so that I can navigate things better. And he literally told me that he thought I could just benefit from taking a nap. And I just thought, okay, so if I can't get help from my own doctor, where am I supposed to get help? I don't have any other kind of resources. So thankfully I advocated for myself and I asked a different doctor if they could help me because I just knew I was not in the place to really help myself. I needed some help to get me through it. And so I went on an antidepressant, which truly saved my life. And I know there's a lot of taboo around medication. I did end up going into therapy as well, which helped me navigate other things to come. So one thing that I haven't been as open about, but I'm comfortable being open about, is that after my mom died, I actually found out that my biological dad was somebody I had never met. So through a 23andMe test, which was given to me as a gift, I realized that I had this whole other family that I had never known about, had never met. I had 3 half siblings and a father that I didn't know. And he had actually passed away back in like 97. So I had so many questions that I wanted to ask that I had nobody to ask because they were gone. And then I also struggled with the fact that my half siblings, their mother was very upset that I existed. And so that was just a very hard thing to overcome as well. But thankfully through therapy and just having a support system through my husband, I mean, I don't know that I would have survived all these things that happened in a span of like 2 or 3 years without the support from my therapist, from medication, from my now husband. It was really tough. But talking about it, I just really feel like people who go through something tough, some sort of adversity, it's so important to talk about it because there's other people out there who might go through something similar or even something worse. Not that we should be competing for, whose tragedy is worse. But I just think it helps people feel less alone because from the outside, somebody might look at me and think, oh, she's got it all together. She's got this husband and these beautiful kids and whatever, but they don't know the struggles that I still face sometimes or that I've recently faced and had to get through. And I feel like that's just common for everybody. Everybody is fighting a battle you just don't know anything about.
Yeah. Oh, that is so good. And I want to start off by saying I'm so sorry.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, that is multiple things that would make anyone start spiraling into a mental health crisis. I mean, you just named several that stacked up upon each other, and it's amazing to see you in a good spot and just being willing to talk about it rather than hiding in shame or anger and, just going off the deep end a little bit like a lot of people do. So you're exactly right, man. We have to bring that pain and shame to light. Mm-hmm. We have to expose it. We have to talk about it with trusted friends and loved ones, and get therapy. That's been my story as well. I had a support team. I had to get therapy. I had to get on medication. And so thank you so much for sharing that. I know that is not easy stuff to talk about, so thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think my biggest point is that your circumstances do not have to define what your future is. And so I really wanted to make sure I didn't repeat the same mistakes that my mom made. My mom had a lot of wonderful qualities, but there were a lot of things that I think she probably would have done differently had she known better or had the tools to cope differently. And so I just didn't want to repeat that. I wanted my daughter to feel that mother-daughter relationship that I didn't get to have. And so now I get to have it in a different way. But that was a choice I had to make for myself, that I didn't want the same thing for the rest of my life, and I didn't want it for my daughter. And so a lot of people who grow up with someone in their family who struggles with addiction, they end up going down that same route because it's all that they know, it's what they're comfortable with, and it's difficult to ask for help. It's difficult to look inside yourself and realize that there are some things that you have to change. Like there were times in my marriage or in my relationship with my now husband where I didn't know if we were going to make it, but it was because of my own issues, my own trust issues, my own issues with communicating, with handling my anger and things like that. There was a lot of inside work that I had to do to undo the things that I had grown up around.
As someone that's in school to become a licensed counselor, hearing a story like yours is so inspiring because you're someone who can acknowledge some of the pain and brokenness in your path, and your resiliency says, you know what, I want to pave a new path for my life, for my family, for my marriage, and for my kids. There are some things that were good maybe that I want to apply to my life, but there's some things, man, I don't want to repeat those mistakes. I want to, pave a new path, and so that's just so awesome to hear, so beautiful to hear, so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, and we joined church when I turned 35. So back in April of this year, we decided to start going to church. And one of the biggest things that I've gained from going to church is learning to find gratitude in things that are tough. And so I am very grateful for the way that I grew up. Granted, there were some really hard times, and there was a lot of times that I was not grateful in the moment. But I think about it now, and I was recently asked to be the keynote speaker at a women's conference this summer. And I'm thinking to myself, I am so grateful for what I went through, because had I not gone through that, would I have this type of story to tell to help other women in a similar situation? And so even though there are times where things were really tough and I didn't know if I was going to get through it or how I would end up, I can say now that I'm grateful for those things. And I really do have gratitude for the things that I went through. It shaped me into this person now. Not to say that I'm like this perfect person, but I'd like to think that I can help people by talking about it.
Yeah. That kind of makes me think, I love saying, our healing is never just for us.
Yeah.
It's always for the flourishing of others. So now that you've got some healing in your own life, opportunities are coming to share your story with other people so they can, man, that's me. They can say, I'm in that same spot. Like, she got help, she became healthy. I can do that too. So way to go.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for letting us crash your studio
anytime.
and talk about Mama Mystery and mental health. Be sure to look below in the description, and I'm going to drop all of Mama Mystery's social media links for you guys to check out what Kelly and her husband Austin are up to. So be sure to follow along. And if you've enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon. Thanks, guys.